Merry Christmas Eve, peoples, and let me rip through our sponsorship so I can get right to the podcast. That sponsor is Sparkplug Coffee, who sell premium quality beans, which are the best you'll ever brew. Sparkplug is convenient and affordable, and it's so much cheaper and more delicious than takeout. Convenient so much, in fact, that it will be delivered to the front door of Canadians and Americans. The front door, man! My countrymen and women up here north of the border even get free shipping. And if you're interested so far, you should be interested in starting up a membership in Sparkplug's Autopilot Coffee Club. You can pause or cancel anytime, especially if you decide to ride the rails with your fellow hobo and won't have a fixed address for a while. The website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. That HYES promo code will save you 20% off your next order. But you can only use that code one time. Brew it the best and find your new favorite from Sparkplug Coffee. All right, well, Long John Willoughby isn't going to talk about himself, so let's get to the review and action. Have you ever seen Meet John Doe? Hello, you helots, and surprise! I didn't promote that I would be covering this movie for our 634th episode because it was relatively spur of the moment. I decided to pack more on my plate because this movie does have some Christmas themes, and the ghost of Frank Capra was demanding I do this. So here's an unexpected, unpromoted episode here on Christmas Eve. I'm your everyman podcaster who could use a shower and a shave, Ryan Ellis. And that's literally true because I fell out of bed 20 minutes ago. I'm on a tight schedule for reasons I won't explain. I literally need a shower and a shave. Usually I have already had those things before I sit down. I'm recording this episode alone today. Bev was on the show with me yesterday when we talked about the Santa Claus, and she'll be back on Monday. But I'll be spoiling Meet John Doe on my own today. All right, well, Fake News was released by Warner Brothers on May 3rd, 1941, although we didn't get it here in Canada until June 4th. Wikipedia says this extravaganza made a little shy of $2 million that year, so that sounds like a hit to me in 1941 dollars. According to the box office site The Numbers, $2 million at the box should have ranked it in the top 10, maybe 9th or something, but they don't list it there. They do have Cooper's Sergeant York as the number one hit of 1941, though, and by a wide margin. How about a plot description? Well, Frank Capra directed and Robert Riskin wrote the screenplay for this motion picture. Gary Cooper plays John Willoughby, a homeless man who reads a newspaper story about a guy who's suicidal, but also an idealist who's discouraged at the direction his country has taken, and his made-up name is John Doe. Breaking news! Barbara Stanwyck is Ann Mitchell. She wrote that story, which she made up just to get attention from the editor who had fired her. Then he hires her right back when that column about Mr. Doe turns out to be very popular with the readers. James Gleason plays that editor, Henry Cannell. The paper's publisher, D.B. Norton, is played by Edward Arnold, and he's a tycoon who takes advantage of the movement that John inspires across the country. And as it turns out, Mr. Doe isn't suicidal at all. He becomes a populist, in fact, and he fires up the regular people throughout the country. The climax happens where the story originally said it would, on the roof of City Hall, as Norton's machinations have disillusioned John enough that he just might take a swan dive after all. And this tense final scene takes place at midnight on Christmas. So Christmas Eve, but really into Christmas. I think you hear the bonging of the alarm. Not the alarm, what do you call it? The Big Ben clock, whatever. It's midnight, Christmas night, but Christmas Eve, whatever. Or, in a nutshell, you can't flight from City Hall. I know the grammar's a little strangled there, but you know the expression, you can't fight City Hall. Okay, before I break down the plot of Meet John Doe scene by scene, let's talk facts and figures, reviews, awards, and such. On Rotten Tomatoes, this film is at 92% fresh with the critics. There are 25 reviews on there, 23 of them are positive. The average rating is 7.5 out of 10. And on the popcorn meter, the audience thing, this is a very respectable 82%. Nearly everything Frank Capra directed rates very highly on that site. In fact, as good as those numbers are, those are only the 9th best reviews, 9th best of Capra's directing career. It Happened One Night, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life, and You Can't Take It With You all rank even higher, and we've covered them all. For Gary Cooper, super duper! This is only something like the 20th best reviewed film of his on the Tomatoes. Ball of Fire is perfect, 100%, and both Cooper and Stanwyck were also in that. But also High Noon and The Pride of the Yankees all fared even better than Meet John Doe did, and we've covered all 4 of those films. Coop has something like a dozen movies that are 100% fresh on the Tomatoes, and Barbara Stanwyck has 6 or 7 perfect ratings on that site, so this is only about her 10th best reviewed film. I didn't look, it's probably in some cases that they're so old they had 6 people that reviewed them and they all liked it, but still, 100% is 100%. This motion picture was nominated for 1 Oscar. The original story by Richard, I assume Cannell, since the character in the movie's name is Cannell, but maybe it's Connell, and Robert Prusnell, P-R-S-N-E-L-L, Sr. The only other nomination of any kind listed in the IMDb's awards section is that James Gleason was up for Best Acting, quote-unquote, Best Acting, from the National Board of Review, which were for both this performance and for Here Comes Mr. Jordan. And he wasn't just nominated, he won that prize. Capra's inspirational flick ended up 49th on the American Film Institute's list of top 100 cheers. Cooper's John Willoughby was also nominated for the top 50 heroes, but he did not make that cut. He already had 2 heroes on there as it was, Cooper did. Will Kane from High Noon and Alvin York from Sergeant York made that list. Interestingly enough, those are his 2 Oscar wins as well. Anyway, that's the movie by the numbers. Let's get into the story. We open to the jaunty opening strings of Roll Out the Barrel. They'll have a barrel of fun. And then snippets of so many other songs that I couldn't keep up to tell you what they are. I didn't write them all down. Fitting the theme of the movie about the everyman and regular people just trying to get by, we see men going off to war and babies in a nursery and people just working, living their lives. Columnist Ann Mitchell is being let go from her newspaper, The Bulletin, because it's under new management. In fact, there's some tomfoolery with the changing sign out front, they jackhammer that, and the new editor's name on his office door, which maybe other viewers found laugh out loud worthy, especially back then. I didn't find it funny, but it was cute, I guess. Anyway, Ann begs to keep her job, and she'll even settle for less money, but the new managing editor, Henry Cannell, Gleason, won't hear of it. He just wants to make a change in hopes of bringing in more readers. I guess Ann's the scapegoat for how many readers the paper doesn't have. She's cheesed off about being fired, but she realizes that she's not going to win this fight, until she makes up a story about a John Doe who supposedly wrote to her that he's so disgusted with the direction America has taken and how he's been left behind that he's going to kill himself on Christmas Eve. The lady has verve, just outright lying like this. Important people believe Ann's creative lie, and they all get worked up about John Doe's announcement, including the mayor and the governor. People are writing in that they want to help, and in some cases to marry the guy. People are nuts when they do that. You've never heard of this person, or they are a psychotic killer that's become famous. I'd like to marry him. OJ, are you free? Ann comes back to the paper after being gone for a little while. Well, being fired and all, she was gone. And even though she admits she made it all up, she convinces Cannell that her fictional character no longer wants to die. He instead wants to speak out about all that's wrong with the country. So yeah, fake news. But these genial liars are going all in, and they need to hire somebody to play their man Johnny. Cannell still isn't into continuing this charade at first, until the rival newspaper, The Chronicle, accuses them of doing what they actually did, make it all up. What really chaffs his hide is when The Chronicle called them amateur journalists. Isn't The Chronicle the opposing paper in Citizen Kane as well? He's the Inquirer, they're The Chronicle, same year as well. A throng of dirty-looking dudes show up and they say they are John Doe. So them being right there, ready to be the Bulletin's Huckleberry, and that shot taken by the other paper convinces the boss to go with the story and to hire Ann back. Super duper! Gary Cooper is one of the men outside Cannell's office, claiming that he's their John, even though he's not delusional, and he's not even an unhappy guy. Definitely not suicidal. Not yet. Our man, Long John Willoughby, is unshaven and disheveled. Sound familiar to me right now? But the former Bush League ball player with the injured elbow is also handsome and shy. And he's perfect! With the money they'll pay him, he hopes to get surgery on his arm, which he says later was hurt when he chipped a bone in his elbow while pitching 19 innings in a single ball game. Modern analytics guys would lose their minds about that. John's also very hungry, eyeing Cannell's sandwich on his desk a few times. So after he faints, or maybe pretends to faint, they feed him enough food to choke 5 horses, but also they feed his friend the Colonel, the Walter Brennan character. Oh, there, dude. He's not really doing that in this movie so much. That's the voice the guy has, I guess, anyway, but he's not sounding like, oh, there, Stumpy. I don't know why he gets to be part of this feast. Well, he is John's Greek chorus, and he had to get into the movie somehow. These 2 guys met on a boxcar, and now they're fast friends, who both play harmonicas to entertain Ann. Actually, isn't Walter Brennan's thing not a harmonica? Well, whatever. Same basic idea. Ann convinces her editor that they need to clean John up and put him in a nice hotel, and also keep him away from the public for a while. They got to build this thing up and keep the readers buying more papers after all. The Colonel continues to get to hang out with his buddy, arguing with him about having money and a home and a bank account and having to deal with taxes and insurance and 1,000,001 other things. Means you're not free and happy anymore. And then he become a heel-lot, as he keeps calling people. I meant to look up what that means. Obviously, it's not a good thing. His little speech actually gets through to John, a lot of speechifying in this movie, who hands over a $50 bill, saying his old friend can do what he wants with it, which is to get some fishing equipment and then give away the rest. At least the old coot practices what he preaches. And I say old coot, but Brennan was only in his mid-40s during this production. He's just one of those guys who always looked like a geezer. And shows up with some guys from the paper to get some pictures of the supposedly suicidal forgotten man, although all he can do is grin when she brushes his hair. She's touching me! But that's not the vibe they need. They need him to be fired up and angry. They do get a shot of him getting excited and pointing a finger. He's poking holes in the air with his finger, because Anne manipulated him into asking what he'd say to an umpire who called a strike a ball. And the text in the paper just says that he was angry about all sorts of things, even though the snapshots were of him imagining baseball scenarios. We meet D.B. Norton at this point, the rich man who owns the paper, and a lot of other things. This is Edward Arnold, who played a similar ultra-rich man in Mr. Smith a few years earlier for Capra. Cannell and Anne appeal to him to put John on the radio and really take advantage of the frenzy the story has caused. Well, she does that. The editor isn't really into taking things this far. But the big man, the big boss, sides with the lovely young columnist. He'll even up her salary from $30 a week to $100. And he also wants her to work directly with him on this Doe story from now on. I thought they were setting up that he was into her and was going to make a move later on and then be rejected, but it's never overt that he has gooey romantic feelings for the Enster. So I guess I was wrong about that. Anne feverishly types one of her columns at home, or maybe all of them are typed at home, I don't know, which gives us the chance to meet her mom, the Spring Byington character. Mama wants her to ease up on the doom and gloom. Instead, do something positive. Stop getting people all worked up about everything that's wrong with the country. And keep in mind about the theme of regular people's feelings about their country that America was not yet in World War II. Pearl Harbor was many months away from happening. The country's attitude would change greatly after that. It was the 9/11 of its day. But this was the same year of that huge event. Anyway, these two actresses only have, 2 scenes together? But they do have good chemistry. They're a believable mother and daughter. While John and the Colonel pretend to pitch and catch back in the hotel, we see what we also see in The Pride of the Yankees. The Cooper was not an athlete. His exaggerated pitching style is fairly accurate to the time period. Arms and legs every which way type of thing. But still, his form is pretty awful. I can relate to what he's doing, though, imagining balls being hit, errors being made, and even pantomiming an argument with the umpire. I did all that when I was young. He's not young, I'm talking when I was very young, maybe 12. I had a pretty great imagination and concocted entire sporty scenarios in my backyard with just a ball and a bat. I can still see vividly in my head when the Blue Jays won the '87 World Series. I can still see it in my head in my parents' backyard. One of the paper's flunkies reminds John that he won't be able to get his arm fixed up and then get into the major leagues once people find out he was never suicidal, that he's a fake. I guess baseball threw a big frown on that kind of dishonesty in those days. Plus, kids will be devastated. They need an honest hero. Because Babe Ruth, Ty Cobb, and Rogers Hornsby were always upright heroes when they were playing baseball. When it's just the two of them, the flunky tells John he can get $5,000 for telling the truth on the radio. The Chronicle will pony up for him to do that. Newspapers were big money back then. Well, I guess they would be, right? No TV, and radio was pretty big, I guess, but newspapers were where it was at. $5,000 in early 40s money? That's something like $107,000 today. The truth is bank, baby. But the Bulletin wants to lie, which is costing them a lot less in salary to John than that $5,000 would be to the Chronicle. I can do math. While getting him ready to appear on the radio and lie his buttocks off, he'll lie his buttocks off, Anne reveals that she's in love with John, but the one she's created in her columns, not the guy standing in front of her. Many people pile into the room and all kinds of photo ops with various fans are supposed to be gut-busting here. But this movie isn't really all that funny, so all this was fine, but I didn't laugh. A recurring theme today. John's put in front of a bunch of radio mics to deliver the fiery speech they've written for him. They remind us all that he's still determined to kill himself by jumping off the roof of City Hall on Christmas Eve. He awkwardly reads the speech about the average man, and it has just about everybody on the edge of their seat. They laugh when they're supposed to and sympathize when they're supposed to. Some of this monologue reminded me of Henry Fonda and Jane Darwell's speeches in The Grapes of Wrath, which came out the year before this. The speech has Darwell's "'cause we're the people" vibe to it. It even seems to affect Cannell, and it's got Anne near tears. But about her own work, don't forget. It also reminded me a lot of Sullivan's Travels, My Man Godfrey, and of course, Mr. Smith. This is basically Mr. Smith Goes to Washington Part 2. The Colonel isn't pleased with pretty much any of this phony speechifying, but John eventually gets into it, reading Anne's words almost like he wrote them. Saying, "We all have to pitch in together," gets a big round of applause, even from the servants in Norton's house, who are taking time out from work to listen on the radio. When he's done, John gets a standing ovation from the throng and a hug from Anne. He was wonderful, but still, he and the Colonel hustle out of there. I guess the inspirational words got to John Boy, and he's rattled by it, so he and the Colonel get on a train and hightail it out of town. He pulled a Chappelle, things were going great, and he bailed. They end up in a diner in a place called Millsville, but John is quickly recognized by the overacting kid behind the lunch counter. Everybody was galvanized by his speech, and they chase after him as he and the Colonel race out of the diner. Ann and Norton make the trip to Millsville too, only they drove there, no rail riding for them, and they try to convince our man to go back and keep being their John Doe. He just wants to go back to living his life and still holds out hope that he can make it to the majors. He just has to get that arm fixed, although he seems to forget that he needs Norton's money for that. Or maybe the Chronicles, I guess. But a soda jerk named Bert comes in, hey Bert, and tells our main characters a very long story about how he started the John Doe Club and is bringing his community together. I like this scene, even if Regis Toomey does go on and on and on. I guess he did this entire thing in one take, although they do show Cooper in reaction shots, so Capra didn't use a single long take in the finished film. And his speech works because John sees how much his fake story has meant to real people. He recommits to the cause and decides to ride the rails on the paper's dime, speaking to regular people across the country, inspiring them to believe. It's a montage. He's reaching millions of voters, and both the Democratic and Republican Party leaders want in on this attention he's getting. They saw it was working and said, me too. Anne starts to realize that John actually believes the words she's written for him, and that he's in love with her. She's been a fast talker all movie long, but in this scene she gets quiet and reserved when Mr. Doe walks in and moons over her. Love brewing. I like that he's sitting too. Cooper's so tall, and of course Stanwyck's across the room, but he would tower over her. Instead he's more of a supplicant, may not be the right word, but he's not dominating, even in a friendly, lovey way. Lovey, lovely, loving. Norton seems to be trying to charm her, not with folksy stories and authenticity, though. Well, he's not seeming to. He isn't doing those things. But with money and presents. The rich man buys her a mink coat and a diamond bracelet. Oh, but then announces that he needs John to say he'll be forming a third political party, the John Doe Party, and that he'll endorse D.B. Norton for president. So what does that make John? The CEO and the other guy's going to be the president? Why wouldn't it be John's party and he's the candidate? Well, we know why. Rich man's taken over. Arnold hadn't been playing this guy as evilly in this movie as he did Taylor in Mr. Smith. But oh boy, here comes a pretty big dose of evility. A rich man trying to hijack a populist movement. Or try to be populist, pretend he is populist. No one's ever tried that before. John brings in a big box of flowers to Anne's house, but only Mama Mitchell and her dog are there. He makes friends with her cute pooch, which got me more on his side, I'll tell you that. John tells Mrs. Mitchell that he's trying to find a way to tell Anne he's in love with her, but we know he's right in saying that he thinks she's only in love with the John that she made up with her typewriter. He's clearly hoping that Mama will put in a good word for him. Long John has a drink at a bar with a very drunk Cannell, who lets our hero in on what the skunk Norton is planning to do with the John Doe movement. That skunk. Gleason owns this scene. Cooper mostly just listens to him. I guess Gleason's recognition from the National Board of Review was for this scene, where he gets to play drunk and slurs the truth to the doster. Getting to play drunk or dying in a movie, often a key to award success. John goes over to Norton's, who's hosting a meeting with rich and powerful SOBs, who could care less about this movement that means so much to people. Well, they care in the sense of taking it over. Norton may have ponied up for the John Doe clubs, but Johnny Boy says that Norton will get to call the shots over his dead body. Norton even gets in his face about how he knows what's best for the John Does of America and calls Willoughby a fake. Which of course he is. The tycoon claims that he and his friends are the real people, because they're not lying about what they are. Well, until you rich dudes own up to the fact that you're the reason for pretty much all of our problems, then you are lying. It's damn immigrants. No, it's the guy who hired the immigrant and paid him nothing. He's the bad guy. John finds out they'll kill the movement if they can't use it for their own ends, so he gets to deliver a speech here just like Jimmy Stewart does when he confronts Mr. Potter about the building and loan after Peter Bailey dies. It's actually a great speech, and if a real person said these words, they might galvanize even more people than were already being galvanized. John's parting shot is to punch out Norton's dingus nephew and race out of there, with Anne trying to convince him that she's on his side now. But he does not believe her. John goes to speak at the massive convention, which is outdoors in a ballpark, and it's raining hard. We see just how dedicated his fans are to this cause, to deal with getting sopping wet just to be part of this. But this movie is really turning into Mr. Smith Part 2 because Norton mobilizes the troops so he can besmirch John's name, like they do in Mr. Smith when it's, Jefferson Smith is a liar and a fraud. He should be drummed out of the Senate. I was going to say Congress, but he's a senator. And our supposed hero somewhat deserves this because he is a fraud. Norton even gets in front of the microphones and tells, yeah, the truth. It's twisted how he frames it, but John didn't write a suicide note or want to kill himself. And he did take money to do all this, while Anne and Cannell made a nice profit from this big lie too. The people want to believe John, but Norton's goons pull the plugs on the mics while some plants in the crowd start to boo. Those plants are very key. Boo, boo. So just like a Simpsons mob, they've given the word mob a bad name. They all join in the booing, throwing newspapers and other junk at him. Even Bert gives up on him. No, Bert. If you've lost the soda jerk, you've lost America. John doesn't even need them to believe in him so much. He just wants them to not give up on the idea of the clubs. But they can't hear him, and they're too disgusted to actually listen to what he might have to say anyway. A reporter commentating on the event says this is the end of the John Doe movement to his listeners. Wow, that was fast. Which takes John and the Colonel back to the side of the river to live their hobo lives again. Becoming a pariah depresses John to the point where now he really does want to commit suicide the way Anne wrote it, by jumping off the roof of City Hall on Christmas Eve. I don't belong here. I don't belong anywhere. Ho, ho, ho. Fittingly, the climax does happen the day before Christmas. Hey, that's today, as Anne, the Colonel, and Cannell show up at City Hall, looking to stop John from becoming a bird who can't fly. Norton and his so-called important people show up to the roof and look around for John, but he's not there. He somehow does show up without being seen by any of the people we like who are looking out for him on the lower level, and he ambles over to the railing. The rich guys see him, but they don't say anything at first. I guess they want him to do it. John has written a suicide note to all the John Does everywhere. As he takes a step up to think about making that dive, Norton does pipe up to stop him. Not out of compassion, but to let him know the mayor will cover this up. He can't be a martyr if no one knows he died for the cause. Anne makes the save, though, racing in to say she loves him and won't let him do this. Even she now believes in the uprising that she created, begging him to go home with her and restart the movement. Most of all, no death, please. Even some of his biggest fans, including Bert, show up in time to see this drama, as Anne gives a passionate speech about how you can't give up. You have to keep fighting. I have to admit, this speech got to me. Maybe because it's Barbara Stanwyck saying it. I've lost a lot of hope ever since a certain terrible person started to dominate our lives 9 years ago, and now even more so in the past month and a half. But this was inspirational. AFI top 100 cheer, after all. Bert and the others pipe up that they've decided not to give up on him or the movement. I guess that's what convinces him. Well, Anne did too, because he carries Anne's passed-out body to the elevator to go off with those who believe in him. James Gleason is the one who gets the last line, telling Norton that they're the people. Try and lick that. So now even the cynical newspaper editor has become a believer. Look what you did, Norton. You made people band together and guess what? Maybe band together and try to take you down. Like that'll ever happen. So the movie's over, but a few more thoughts here before I get into the cast. Capra and his team had a hard time finding the right ending, and I'm not sure if Frank even liked the one he went with all that much. It sounds like he more just settled, didn't go with something he felt awesome about. One of them would have been that John goes through with it and dives off the roof. There's no way you end a movie with a mostly amiable tone that this one had that way. Maybe it's realistic, but that's a little cynical even for a cynic like me. Or a disappointed idealist, as the fella says, as George Carlin said. What works best about this is bringing back his acolytes who were so devoted to the John Doe clubs before they found out he's a fraud. Johnny may be zooey about Anne, and she did her best to change his mind, but it's the unwashed masses who really need him as their symbol of hope, and the ones he has a connection with. That's a pretty solid reason to go on living. I remember seeing this movie a long time ago and wasn't a big fan of it. I'm still not a big fan, but I would give it at least 3 stars now. See, I'd made a vow after the election not to cover political movies so much anymore, and try to avoid getting political in our podcast, especially apropos of nothing, as I know I've done plenty of times. If I go too far down that road after this past election, I might want to go to City Hall for some pretty unthinkable reasons. And I forgot just how political this movie gets, with a rich SOB trying to take advantage of people by hijacking a grassroots movement. People were upset the direction their country was going, so they put faith in a fraud. Familiar? And how do people react when they find out a person they put on a pedestal turns out to be a big fat phony? Well, we all have a right to be angry about that, but if what he did got them to do something positive, then there is value even in the fraud. The John Doe clubs were about being better people, and it's a shame that even fictional characters could be so easily disillusioned. John Doe matters, but the movement and what they're doing with it now should matter more than even his life. I don't think Gary Cooper smiles as he walks off either. Maybe he shouldn't be. He was about to kill himself. But he doesn't really seem like he's truly happy at the end of the movie. I don't do what happens next on my own, but what does happen next for him? Is he actually going to be okay now? So the cast, and it's an enormous cast, but I'll just highlight 5 or 6 of them right now. Gary Cooper has come up around these parts in reviews of Ball of Fire, The Pride of the Yankees, and High Noon. 1941 was a monster year for Mr. Super Duper, because The Sarge, Ball of Fire, and this came out that same year. Although while Tony Soprano thinks the world needs more guys like Gary Cooper, I continue to not be his biggest fan. I feel like he was almost always awkward, and there's something inauthentic about his voice, as if he's reading the dialogue, not acting it. Not always, but enough times it's always bothered me about him. That's even true in some parts of High Noon, which generally is a wonderful performance, maybe his best. But even there, it's not always very good. Now, while Cooper was Capra's first choice to play the title character, not Jimmy Stewart, Barbara Stanwyck was not who he sought to play Anne Mitchell. Anne Sheridan and Olivia de Havilland were up for it first. Stanwyck is one of my all-time favorites, and she's so lovely in this. I don't remember her looking this pretty before, even in Ball of Fire, where she's playing a showgirl and she's supposed to be a major babe. I said Cooper had a huge year in 1941. Well, so did The Stand. She was in something like 5 films in total that year, with the other 2 highlights being Ball of Fire and The Lady Eve. I love that movie so much. Still, very funny film. She was also just brilliant as the villainous Mrs. Dietrichson in Double Indemnity in 1944. One of the best films that made the AFI's list, and one of my top 10 movies of all time. I suggest you go on YouTube and look up the 1978 Oscars for the Sound and Visual Effects Awards. Stanwyck and William Holden come out to present those awards together, but before they open any envelopes, he goes off script and thanks her for saving his career back in the late 30s. The studio was going to fire Holden from a movie they were making together called Golden Boy. I guess he was stinking like a pile of stank, and the suits at Columbia had seen enough. But she stepped in and got them to give him another chance. He never forgot that, and I don't think she had any idea he was about to talk about all that in 1978 at the Oscars. It's very touching. And then when she was given a long overdue honorary Oscar in 1982, she ended her speech by saying that Golden Boy Holden got his wish because he always wanted her to win an Oscar. And he had died only a few months earlier, so it was even more poignant that she won it when she did. Yep, it's fair to say I love the lady born Ruby Stevens as both an actress and a pretty great human being. We know that Edward Arnold was the money-grubbing supervillain a few years earlier in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, and he was in Capra's You Can't Take It With You, too. If Lionel Barrymore hadn't been available to play Mr. Potter in It's a Wonderful Life, Mr. Potter, Eddie Arnold would have been perfect in that role. James Gleason was in a lot of movies, including 2 we've covered, The Bishop's Wife, another Christmas movie, and The Night of the Hunter, and he got the supporting actor Oscar nomination the same year this came out, for Here Comes Mr. Jordan. Walter Brennan worked alongside Gary Cooper plenty of times in his career, including in The Pride of the Yankees the following year. That's Dirty Pool. The 3-time Oscar winner was also in many films directed by Howard Hawks, including To Have and Have Not, Red River, and Rio Bravo, all 4 of which we've covered, those 3, and The Pride of the Yankees. And the last actor I'll talk about is Spring Byington, who was nominated for her role as Jean Arthur's mother in You Can't Take It With You. She was also in the Best Picture winning Mutiny on the Bounty, which I haven't seen in 11 years, but she's not Polynesian, so I'm guessing she's a character really early on, and we don't see her again. The director and producer was the immortal Frank Capra. 5 years after making this Christmas-themed movie, he directed and produced one of the most beloved Christmas movies ever, It's a Wonderful Life. Frankie C. won 3 Oscars for directing, all in the 30s. Those are for It Happened One Night in 34, another Gary Cooper movie, Mr. Deeds Goes to Town in 36, and they gave it to him again for You Can't Take It With You in 38. He was also nominated for directing trophies for Mr. Smith and It's a Wonderful Life. If the AFI ever did a top 100 directors list, you know their voters would rank him somewhere in the top 20, maybe the top 10. I'm not saying he should be, but he would be with them. Robert Riskin wrote the script based on that Oscar-nominated story by Richard Connell and Robert Presnell Sr. Riskin worked with Capra plenty of times. One of those was It Happened One Night, another old movie that's legitimately funny still, and that won him a Gold Naked Guy. Plus, he was the scriptwriter for You Can't Take It With You for Capra. George Barnes shot the black and white pictures in the 1:3:7:1 ratio. They made a good-looking movie here, but I don't think he ever worked with Capra again. He did work with Hitchcock a few times and even won some gold for shooting Rebecca for him the year before this came out. Daniel Mandel was the cutter. He went on to win 3 Oscars, including the very next year for The Pride of the Yankees. Dmitry Tiomkin composed the music. He worked with Capra on a regular basis, including on Mr. Smith and It's a Wonderful Life, and he won 4 Academy Awards later in his career, 2 of them for High Noon. Do not forsake me, oh my darling. Oh, before I wrap this up today, I have some suggestions about how you can watch this if you still want to after hearing me warble on about it. First of all, TCM is airing this movie later today, which is one reason I listen to the universe's demands that I cover it. They aired it earlier in the month, too. In fact, the day before I recorded this. Turner Classic was saying, Ryan, just review this thing, whether you really love it or not. There's Christmas in it, you fool! But what I ended up watching was one of the 3 free prints that are on YouTube. One of them was colorized, though. No thanks. Canopy has it too, but their print was awful and was 5 minutes shorter than it's supposed to be. I don't know why that was. The reason the movie is so available is that it fell into the public domain a long time ago, which explains why some of the prints are so terrible. Some of them are probably uploads of somebody's VHS tape. I'm going to time travel a little bit with this part of the story because there's a print on Wikipedia as well. The reason I'm time traveling is because I recorded my Steamboat Bill Jr. episode, the Keaton movie, that will go up on January before I even committed to covering this at all. So you'll hear in that episode about how I discovered that there's a print as a link on Wiki for that too, and I'll act like I've never heard of this before. But I'm talking about this now, but that's because I watched and even thought about doing this after I was done with that one. I never noticed before this week, mid-December, that site posts links to entire movies. And yes, you can watch Meet John Doe that way too. Okay, Santa is breaking into my house in just a few hours, so let's start winding this thing down. Well, I mostly enjoyed the picture and respect the message. I didn't laugh at it, and I didn't really buy the love story either. Cooper and Stanwyck sell it the best they can. It's just not a natural fit. Their love and Ball of Fire was even more of an oil and water thing, but that film focused on that angle more than this does, and it was more successful as a result. But yeah, the film is certainly watchable, and I almost always like me some Capricorn. He made so many entertaining films about the struggle of the everyman who succeeds in the end, but old Frank was going to put him through hell before they succeed in the end. And what was it with Frank Capra and suicide on Christmas Eve? He had Jimmy Stewart thinking about jumping off a bridge in It's a Wonderful Life. But even 5 years before that, here's Cooper thinking about hitting some pavement. But hats off, because he managed to make that dark angle work in both films. Capra really was great at balancing tonal shifts. There's a lot of comedy in It's a Wonderful Life and silliness, and then it gets so dark in the last maybe 40 minutes. Although that gear shifting works better there than I think it did here. I listened to the universe and they were wrong. I don't dislike the movie. It's okay. So that was how I saw Meet John Doe. I'll give you just one trivia question today, since I don't want to linger too long on this day before Christmas. So here it is. As often as Marty Scorsese and Bobby De Niro have worked together, until they reunited for The Irishman, Bob had not been in one of Marty's movies for a long time. What was the film they did make together before The Irishman? All right, what's coming up on Have You Ever Seen? Well, the next time I review a flick on my own will be just a few days from now. This Friday, I'll be talking about Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners. Then Bev is back in the chair opposite mine on Monday when we yap about Being There. We didn't take a holiday break like most people who do podcasts do. We never really have, in fact. We're here for you. Well, not every podcast listener wants their routine to change, even in late December. A lot of people don't care about the holidays at all, and they have a pretty normal life all the way through December. We'd love it if you would return the favor of us giving you so much content this year, and every year, I guess, but this year especially, by rating and reviewing our podcast and subscribing to it. Also subscribe to us on YouTube. That's at HYES Ellis in your browser. Comment on what we said. Hit that like button. You can fire thoughts about the films we cover back at us. The email is haveyoueverseenpodcast@gmail.com. I'm at MovieFiend51 on Twix and Ryan-Ellis on Blue Sky. Bev wasn't here today, of course, but give her some love anyway. She's at Bev Ellis Ellis on Twix and Threads also, while she's Bev Ellis Ellis on Blue Sky. And for the love of all that is oh holy night, order some Sparkplug coffee. Our longtime sponsor will give you a one-time 20% discount if you use our HYES promo code. The website is sparkplug.coffee/HYES. As for the answer to that trivia question, it's this. As often as Scorsese and De Niro have worked together, until they reunited for The Irishman, Bob hadn't been in one of Marty's movies for a very long time. What was the last film they did make together before The Irishman? It was Casino, which came out 24 years earlier, and it'll have its 30th anniversary next year. Okay, that's that. Thanks a lot for spending time with me on Christmas Eve, or whenever you ended up listening to this show. These things are evergreen. You don't have to listen to it on December 24th. Stay safe, have fun, enjoy Kwanzaa or Hanukkah or whatever other holiday you might like more than Christmas. Join me on Friday when I review the very serious Prisoners, and then on Monday when Bev and I will be talking about the very funny Being There. Meantime, I'm going to climb up on a roof and see how the view is. I don't think it's likely I'll need a beautiful woman or my acolytes to swoop in and save my life, though. And cut.